Good day and welcome back to Elementary 72 Gaming. Now this is that special Warroom I was talking about that I was working on. It's not 100% complete and I'm not going to be able to complete it 100%, but nonetheless, here goes. So war in our game is one of the most important parts, and moving forward we're going to have a lot of different types of wars, but we have to understand that the big blob, the big enemy that we're always going to face off in the largest numbers against, is always going to change from time to time. The original big blob that we faced off against was OP4S. Following them, the next big blob that was faced off against was Genesis. And following Genesis is either going to be the new No Alliance, or it's going to be Golden Horde, or it's going to be the big and infamous Silent. So that is exactly where things are heading within the game. Now, in the background, I'm going to be playing the game. This is something that I generally don't do a lot of. You'll see that there's a lot of missions that I was trying to do. Unfortunately, I live in South Africa and we have this constant power cuts. So they knocked me out for 2 hours at a time. I passed out in the time and I didn't manage to complete my missions. But nonetheless, I will be completing missions now. I just have to look for the right ones, and there we go. Okay, so let's get into it with the first operation. Now, the moment the game started, several major alliances and corporations from outside of the EVE universe jumped into EVE. Now, they were namely the Genesis Federation. Now, Genesis Federation is actually this mix of 3 or 4 alliances from several other games. One of the games in which they did exist before this was Second Galaxy. It is the only other place that I knew the Genesis Federation existed. I knew a Genesis Federation from Starfleet Command. I knew, let's see, what else did I know? I knew a Star Wars Corp in Starfleet, but nonetheless, all of them transferred over to different games in the similar genre, and that's the way that most of this went. Now, one of the reasons why I'm doing this is I just want to look at some of the structure prices and what's left on the market. I do have one of these myself being sold on the market. I just want to see what's the competition like. 1, 2, 3, 4. Whoever it is, they jumped the market after I jumped on. They were selling at 220 as well, and they cut their prices to keep me out of the sales. So obviously, you know, it's the way that it goes. Every once in a while you get someone who's going to do that. You have to be prepared for it. It's one of the things that happens in the game. Okay, so let's continue on with it. Now, when they jumped over from various other games, they had similar mechanics to that of EVE Echoes, and this allowed them to adapt and change to the methods required within EVE quite easily. This in turn released a lot of pressure on other major corporations and alliances within the game, and that is where a lot of war and problems began. So as you can understand it, it's all these guys who jumped in from other sources with their massive corporations who caused a lot of trouble. Now, in the initial start of the game, we had almost 2 million players, or at least 2 million game downloads, which if you count it for multi-boxes and so forth, is about 1 million players. And if you count that, we should have lost about 80% of the population to natural fall off, and 20% should have remained on the game. So about a 200,000 strong audience within the game. We unfortunately aren't a 200,000 strong audience. We're somewhere close to a 20,000 strong audience or 40,000 strong audience, which is still a standard for RPG MMOs, but more on the lower class when it's heavy pay to win, and a lot of people feel that elements are impossible to pass. So nonetheless, that's exactly what you should be expecting on your audiences and what was within the game for a start when wars began. Now, the moment this started, we had OP4S jumping up to a whopping 2,000 member count, and they weren't reliant on outside sources for members. Their 2,000 members came from within the game. They came from existing alliances and existing corporations that were in the EVE Online universe. Now, when they came over to the side, they basically figured they could go on with the methods that they had learned in EVE Online, expose it to the game on this side, and take over everything the same way they did in EVE Online. However, OP4S met strong resistance, and that was in the form of the Crimson Null Kingdom, Trimarch, and on the other side of it was the small Genesis Federation that had just started to crop up. Now, Genesis Federation put some pressure on their players in other games to jump onto EVE, and when they did this, their small group of about 600 to 700 instantly blew up to about 2,000 to 3,000. Now, that's because they had a long-term running community of hardcore players from another game and they transposed over. This instantly boosted their power and boosted their popularity against OP4S, who were being very, very aggressive on how they took on terms and how they took over various areas. Now, I did enjoy the original aspect of Genesis Federation. To be honest, I was a very big fan of Genesis Federation just purely because they didn't operate with the hard foot or the hard hand formation. Now, the hard hand formation is basically you take part or we're going to punish you. That is the way that it works, and that is what I didn't like. Now, within the corporation were actually 3 separate departments, one with a very lax leadership. And when I say lax, I mean they led everything, they did everything they needed within their set of branches, and they had some of the best ways of putting rules through to their players. Just a basic set of rules, nothing too harsh, nothing too firm. And that was the Borg element of Genesis Federation. Now, they were my favorites, they still are my favorites from that entire Genesis Federation previously. I don't know whether Genesis Federation should fall with the Tyrant Leader or whether it should fall with the Borg Queen Alondria, but I'm saying more or less that Genesis Federation isn't Genesis Federation without the Borg. The Borg have now joined the Honeybees and are part of the alliance down below, closer to where CNK and Pantheon are. Pantheon has merged a lot of the old powerhouses into them. They've taken over CNK, which became Nova Initiatus due to a coup within the corp. It's a whole mess of a story. Then there's Trimarch, who's joined into Pantheon. I believe Han joined into Pantheon. Some parts of OP4S joined into Pantheon. And that's just the breakup of who Pantheon is right now. Now, Pantheon is an old Greek mythology, so we can expect them to shrink and increase in size depending on who plays the game over time. Now, with all of this comes the whole aspect of sovereignty and how it affected the wars when it started to drop, with the first item being the Capsulia outposts. Now, these 3 major forces decided they were going to try and show their power by dropping stations, and in the form of Capsulia outposts. OP4S made a big mistake allowing their Red Sky division, the Reds OP4S East, who were near CNK, to drop a station in a sector in a visible area, trying to make a show of power that even if you know where it is, you can't take us on. This is where one of their key mistakes were made. They made sure that they opened their challenges in this way. The next thing that they did was they made a whole lot of alliances and they challenged multiple fronts all at once. So that is where OP4S went wrong. That is why the blob, which was OP4S, didn't hold power. Instead of aggressing everybody, they should have been a little bit more peaceful with some corps, held up some of their agreements, and pulled off some of their members from doing some crazy actions, which would have allowed them to then further expand their reign and then take over what they wanted. However, they got too aggressive too quickly and they were exposed as the big bad in the game. It blew up in their face and it ended up resulting in the end of OP4S. Now, following this, a lot of things happen in the game. A lot of progression up from the north also happened in the form of North. North basically used the old Game of Thrones King in the North title for their leader, and they also were adopting a similar system to that of OP4S. Now OP4S, their system is still in play in a certain corp. I will get to that as you move on. But nonetheless, North was using that same system of play, pushing harder and harder to take over more and more corps, and eventually they ran into some serious resistance. Now, when they ran into this resistance, it wasn't just one corp, it was a culmination of multiple corps who got together using YouTube as their backing to gain them some support, and they pushed together on a war and took out North. Now, when North went down, they split up into pieces and joined into multiple corps across the North. This gave rise to the rise of Pandemic. So that is where Pandemic started to rise, and that's why Pandemic has rose as far as they have. On the other side, when OP4S died, Genesis Federation was so powerful and so infamous that they started to rise in power. Now, the reason why these early victories were so easy was there wasn't a diversity of play. One ship was more powerful than all ships due to speed, and that was the reality of what was going on. So moving on from this, they had the next lot of major incidents, a whole lot of fighting and war that happened within these areas, and all of a sudden we have, okay, wait, what was it after the whole primary situation? After this whole situation, we had Genesis Federation growing, but they had problems with one of the other alliances, the bot alliance at the time, Death Phantom DP. Now, Death Phantom had deployed a very tricky method. They were using botted accounts to mine up materials, to gain wealth, to gain power. And this is against the rules of the game, and a lot of people band behind this movement and attack them. Now, several of the problems on the side of Genesis was a lack of planning and a lack of understanding of the development of the game. They kept stagnated at a cruiser level when battle cruisers had advanced too far. And the advanced battle cruisers opened with T8 and they were still stuck in cruisers. This gave Death Phantom a time to recharge and grow larger. They also had this massive tyrant formation forming up where they didn't want their members away from the battle. They wanted their members to be permanently part of the battles. They wanted everybody in on every single battle that occurred. Now, this is bad for several big reasons. Number one, when you pull too many people into one area, you make your counter-offensives almost impossible, and you make a counter-offensive against you very easy. They just have to move to one area and lock down the sector, and you can't move out against them. So counter-offensives became very easy against these types of formations. Genesis tried to pull all of their forces into one region so that they could have a very strong offensive force while reducing their ability to do defense. Now, they did have several members who were capable of deploying a defensive formation. However, they also had very aggressive fleet commanders, which was leading to the downfall of the Genesis Federation. Now, this is the reality of what happened at that time within the entire situation. Genesis started to rise in power, and all of a sudden, these FCs became arrogant with the fact that they believed they were unbeatable. They believed that their methods were unstoppable, and they still followed Day One doctrine, where you kept using speed as your advantage, not realizing that some players had already found ways around speed. Now, yes, I do know that I have found ways around speed for standard players. Guys like Havoc and the collaboration of content creators are just that extra high level play, and that is one of the reasons why I can't hit their fast ships. They're moving at plus 1000 meters per second, even at their slowest ranges. That makes it so crazy for you to actually hit them that it's almost an impossible hit. So they were capable of doing a lot more damage than would regularly be needed. So that's one of the reasons why I lost against them so quickly and easily. They are brilliant when it comes to playing the meta. Now, that is just the first part of this entire situation. So they kept trying to play the speed meta without increasing firepower. Now, the one thing about it is big ships, especially the battle cruisers, if they have pilots who know how to adapt them and how to use them appropriately, can do massive damage to the small ships. And that is where you get the more elite player. They deploy, they play a special strategy, and they win. And this is where Genesis started to lose. They had 5-man with easy to use ships deploying themselves to hold off a force of hundreds. Now, the reason for this was quite simple. They deployed a very smart strategy. They used the 5-man star formation on a gate to stop players from moving through. Also, on the same note, NetEase had interfered with the ability of corps to defend gates. Now, defending off a gate or deploying a station on a gate was a fantastic method for destroying enemies. When you have a large number of stations deployed directly on a gate, you can have what's called lattice formations on the gate. And these crystal lattices allow you to just jump in with the fleet and hold the enemy on a gate. So they can't use it as an exit and entrance point. The moment they get involved in fighting and try to use the gate to run, they're now exposed to the fact that they're just going to get webbed non-stop or target painted till their signatures blow up to the max so the station can hit them. And this is a problem because you don't want to be caught in a situation where no matter what you do, you're getting hit with heavy firepower. The firepower from these stations when deployed in those formations was upwards of 70 to 80,000 a hit against shield fields. So that means they could easily wipe out something like a battleship in 2 or 3 volleys, which is about a minute or a minute and a half. So all of this being put into effect, NetEase decided to remove this type of defensive gameplay to stop players from building up heavy arsenals for quick and easy streamline offenses against enemy factions. So yes, they removed that ability from the game. Those things affected some of the corps who were starting to build up and starting to become formidable. And with this being done, the next thing to follow on this entire situation was the deployment of multiple corps who were dissolving and growing bigger and larger all over the place where you wouldn't notice. Golden Horde was one of the corps who people didn't notice well enough and started to grow at a very large rate, while Genesis started to crumble. That's because Golden Horde held on to a faction of their corporation who are similar to Borg, who are very friendly with their players. They remain one of the outskirt members of the Golden Horde. Now, when I say outskirt, I mean they aren't as offensive as the rest of the Golden Horde, but they do serve a massive purpose. They may not be able to rally 1,000 players to go and fight in 2 minutes, but they can rally a big and significant force to take on forces as arrogant as Genesis Federation. Now, I'm calling Genesis Federation very arrogant because they have this way of implying that they aren't beatable, that they're unbeatable, and it has led to a lot of people actually taking them on where they are the strongest. Okay, right, so that's just about where we go with the Warroom to this point, but things go way further. When you go back down, there's still aspects of North and how they broke up into the multiple corps who took over the North. There's still the story about what happened in the upper southern region between Trimarch and CNK, the Quarius Coalition, various organizations that formed and fell over time, enemy factions, coups, break apart leadership, all these things that happen in that lower region. Now, those I'm just going to cover in one small aspect. These corps weren't mega huge. They were about 200 to 300 members strong at their minimum. CNK was about 600 to 700 members strong. They had a very casual side and they had a very offensive side, just like what you need for a balanced game. They ran volunteer ops and they ran mandatory ops when it came to defenses, but they never ever pushed hard on pushing heavy offenses all the time. They never wanted to tire out their organization. However, leadership being pushed around, eventually it led to a fight within the corporation where they kicked out one of the best diplomatic players in the game, Lead Writer. I'm counting him as one of the best. For a person who didn't mind his language when he came to talking to people, for a person who was himself 90% of the time when he spoke, he had the best diplomatic ties with just about everybody in the game. So that is one of the reasons why I give such a big praise to Lead Writer on the way that he led CNK. He still holds CNK as a name. He never allowed somebody else to take over what he made himself, and I respect him for that decision. It shows that he knew exactly how well he had built it and everything that he had done to put a good corporation together. When CNK dissolved into Nova Initiatus, Nova Initiatus didn't hold the same power as they once held with lead writer at the helm. They pushed a lot of objectives and a lot of things with their members. They became very aggressive. They started to play propaganda to get their own ways with players, and this ended up burning their own hands, as you would say. It cost them a lot in terms of holding power over the catch location in the game. They eventually had to form alliances, and that's how Pantheon got their hold in the south. So that's how Pantheon started to rise. It is purely because of Nova Initiatus that Pantheon exists where they exist. Honeybees, Terran Federation weren't really all that big of a problem or big of a threat in those locations either, so they weren't really a problem at that time. Okay, let's get into this. So that's what happened in the south, and I'm just going to say that although I am giving a very general outlook on it, that was what happened for the south. That's how Pantheon got their foothold, and they managed to hold over the power when leadership started to wane in various areas of the game. That is the secret to Pantheon. That's where their secret started. They came in at the right time with the wrong leadership in charge of a corp, and they capitalized on it in such a way that nobody can blame them for winning what they won. Okay, so moving on to the north. Now, I'm not going to talk about whether Gen is done for as yet, but they're very close to it. Okay, alright, so now heading up to the north. One of the biggest strategies, as I said, that was used in this game is playing the defensive strategy where you actually go very offensive against some players and you hold on multiple reigns at the same time. Now at current, the only corp using the multi-prong assault tactic is Pandemic. Pandemic is using the old OP4S method. They declare war on just about everybody around them, and they offer them a treaty to join them as a way to stop the war. So you join or you will be destroyed. The Daenerys Targaryen of the North. Now, I do enjoy the fact that I'm calling them the Daenerys Targaryen of the North. May not be the best simile for them. They're not as great as Daenerys, unfortunately. I'm a big Daenerys fan, so yeah, that's the only catch that I have against it. But nonetheless, they're using the bend the knee situation to everybody. They offer that as the first option, and when they reject it, it starts off in a war. This is how come they have accumulated a large corp like they have. However, the corp is very volatile. They do have a tendency of kicking out corps completely when they go against the flow of the silent leadership. It has happened several times in the past. CC got kicked out. Several other smaller corps got kicked out. They target members to say they're going to kick them out because the corp isn't living up to what they said they would do, and these are things that some of the players have had prior to my own kicking out of the corp. That's because I held them to an agreement which was on the YouTube side of things, and obviously, you know, they're running a corp. Sometimes it slips your mind. You don't think about what you have said. You're a little bit careless on what you say, and it ends up blowing up in your face when you have somebody like me around who holds people to what they say. So nonetheless, that's exactly what happened, and that's how Silent is growing as large as it is at the moment. They're pulling off this massive strategy of attack everybody as your enemies, but the one smart thing they're doing is they're only attacking one faction at a time. They're only attacking weak factions or very powerful factions as they see. They'll attack one weak and one strong, but they'll never go and advance three sides of war all at once. And they didn't try and pull the hype train on destroying Gen because they were afraid of Gen. I'm not exactly sure what's the whole story there, but there's something up between Silent and Genesis. I don't know the 100% story there, so I can't give you the whole story on that. But that is exactly what happened between those corporations and how they grew to their feats at the moment. Now, beyond these are other corps who are hidden in the background of the situation. There are corps like No, who are growing at the moment. There are corps like, let's see, I've heard of someone else, I'm just not remembering this corp. There's a Western Side corp. I believe they have as much action as all the other guys have. I just don't know exactly what's going on in those regions because I don't have contact with anybody from those corps. So let me just open the map quickly. I have some time here. Sorry about that. Okay, 3, 2, 1. This happens to me all the time. My game freezes when I open up the map. Alright, so towards the area on the side here by Cobalt Edge, there is another corp operating on that end. Now, I don't know who it is exactly, but I do know that they are supposedly a very powerful force. So here in Declan is where you got Silent. In Branch is one of their enemies and one of their friends, so they're heading up that way. On this section is another corp by, what is the name of this here? UUA-F. There's another corp who are housed in that area. They're supposedly quite formidable, but I haven't yet run into them or seen them at all in any form of combat. Then there's Cobalt Edge and Outer Passage. If I am correct, let's see, where is Catch? There's Catch, Curse, Cache. Okay, so if I am correct, right here between, where's Faith of Bolus? Ominous, Tenemus, Imminus, Detoriate, Detroit is all the area where Golden Horde operates. They go all the way down to Providence, and that is their route in and out. That is where the Golden Horde functions in the most. They also use the Great Wildlands as one of their exit points, but there is another corp operating just above them in this area near Cobalt Edge and Outer Passage. They are also supposedly one of the most formidable forces you could go up against, and they are growing in silence. They aren't growing with as much coverage as the Silent Corporation or Genesis Federation or Golden Horde, but I suspect they're going to be more dangerous than them when the next stage of war comes up, because Golden Horde weren't as prominent as Genesis during the OP4S war, but they were growing at the same time. And Pantheon wasn't as prominent as Genesis is right now until they started fighting Golden Horde, because Golden Horde is now the big powerhouse in that section of the game who can take out Gen. And Gen is really worried about it. They fear that they're going to be squashed because they don't have the capability to hold off Golden Horde at the moment. That's why they need so many allies to just help them with that one alliance. If Golden Horde called in their allies, they most probably could suppress Pantheon on the side and crush Genesis all they wanted. That is how powerful Golden Horde is. And if you go up from there, as I said, there are other alliances and corps hidden in those areas who are formidable to a point where you do not want to mess with them. So that is the basics of this war room. That is where I'm going to cut it off. I'm not going into the failed strategies and all of that right now. I don't have enough for all of it. I don't even have all the names. As I said, I was missing a massive piece of information, and now you know what I am missing. I want to know who's situated up in Cobalt's Edge. If you are from that alliance and you end up seeing this video, leave me a message in the comments down below so I know who it is who lives in Cobalt's Edge, who is this other formidable force. If you are interested, if you are the leader, you can obviously contact me directly. I'm more than willing to interview you and find out about your corp and give a quick message for people to join your corp. It's always nice to help the new powers grow. So I hope to see you in the next one. Have a good day.